pipeline, does the things that are necessary to create opportunities, takes natural gas. Do you realize we pay $2.50 for natural gas, and the rest of the world is paying in excess of $15? What a huge economic advantage. What is the president doing about it? Nothing. In fact, he's trying to now threaten the natural gas producers with regulating hydraulic fracking, as if this is some new technology out there that we don't know anything about and that we have to be worried about. Hundreds of thousands of wells in this country have been fracked using hydraulic fracking. This has been going on for years. But now the environmentalists have an opportunity with this president, because some of this hydraulic fracking is now occurring on the East Coast. It's occurring near New York and Philadelphia. So what does that mean? Dollar signs ring up in their eyes. Oh, it's another opportunity to change science into political science and scare people. Right in your backyard. I feel like Professor Harold Hill going into River City. And out there talking about the trouble. Ooh, we got to be scared. We got to be scared of this technology that's producing the cheapest natural gas in the world. It's producing oil that we can sell here and produce here domestically. Now we got to be afraid. Why? So we can get your dollars, turn it to politicians who can win elections so they can control your lives. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a serious election. I've talked about energy, but I can talk about any other area of the economy. I can spend that same time talking about health care. I can talk about what the president's doing to destroy manufacturing. He's gone and talks about how he's going to help manufacturing after he has systematically destroyed it in this country. You pick any area, financial services, one after another, where he has this ideology of government centralized control. Not worried about the interest of people. He's worried about the interest of power, so he can dictate to people what he believes is best for them. This is what's at stake in this election, its foundation. And of course, we all know one of the ways that government has been able to accumulate power is to do so by weakening the institutions that people rely upon in their lives. And so when they can rely upon them, these stable, mediating institutions in our culture, they don't need government. They're not susceptible to the threats and pressure that government will put on you if you, in fact, are dependent upon them for your very lives. And that's why it's not surprising to see the president's assault on first charities. You recall one of his first tax proposals was to limit charitable deductions. Charitable deductions to those media institutions like colleges and universities and civic and community organizations, churches, nonprofits, all of which are built in disproportionate numbers here in America than any other country in the world. We are a country that is rich historically with these institutions in our society here at the grassroots level. Why? Because we built this country differently than any other country has been built. We built it from the bottom up. Who believed that rights didn't come from the government, that the government wasn't there to rule you. The government was there to protect your God-given rights. You folks here probably know because you get taught it, but most folks don't understand how disordered that was. From the standpoint of the history of the world. The idea of God-given rights for the average person in America, for every person in America equally, was a truly revolutionary concept. Oh, it wasn't a revolutionary concept from the standpoint from philosophy, but it was a revolutionary concept to form a government. It was only done once. It's been done here and no place else before or after. The idea of God-given rights, the idea that government's job was to be limited to protect those rights. In the early days of our nation, we had to provide for ourselves. Why? Because government was, in fact, small. small and limited. It was an afterthought. It was inconsequential to most people's lives in America. For over 100 years, that was the case. So were there good things and bad things about that? Yes. But what happened was people had to be more self-reliant. Self-reliant in building organizations and structures like strong families, divorce, out-of-wedlock birth rates. Even as recently in the 1950s, they were in the single digits or the low double digits. Why? Because families had to hold together. Families had to stay together. It was essential for our society. Churches were stronger. Why? Because they had to be. Because, well, government wasn't so big. At the time when I was born in 1958, less than 10% of the federal government's budget was spent on entitlement programs to take care of people. Now 60% of the budget does that. And what has happened systematically is we've seen a degradation of the American family. We've seen an explosion of out-of-wedlock births. We've seen a culture that is radically changed. And government that is there. Some say, well, government facilitated that. Government responded to it in what they believed was a compassionate way by helping. And by doing so, they created the opportunity for more of it to happen. We need a frank discussion in our country about how we can rebuild those civic institutions, how we can rebuild the family and the church. 30 years ago, 71% of the people in this country over the age of 18 were married. It's now 51%. A 5% drop in the last 3 years alone. The institution that everyone in America at one time would go to when they were in trouble is now not there in a way that can be helpful and supportive in many cases. And so government steps in. And all of those media institutions between you and the government fade away. And when government and you are the only two left, guess who's got the bigger voice? Guess who's really going to control the equation? Folks, it's the most important election of your lifetime. It's the most important election because we not only have to revitalize this economy and understand what's at stake there, but we have to revitalize the basic institutions of our country. The church and the family. Taxation on the family. We've seen it dramatically go up on middle-income families in America. The taxation, from every level of government, has dramatically gone up. And of course, one of the biggest pressures on a marriage and on a family is financial. The greater the strain, the harder it is, the more tenuous that relationship can become. We see just on Obamacare. The president says, oh, I'm here to help you. I'm here to give you your right. You realize if you're married under Obamacare, you pay a lot more than if you're living together under Obamacare? A lot more. Thousands of dollars more for the average American family will pay if you're married. If you divorce and live together, Obamacare gives you a break. And they do this in other areas of the government. That's what the marriage company was all about for years. Government says, well, if you're married, you need less help, and therefore we're going to tax you more. We're going to charge you more. And then they get surprised that there's less people married and that marriages break up. If you look at what they're doing to the church, this issue that popped up the last few weeks is not about birth control. It's not about abortion. some of the things in that requirement were abortifacients. The morning after pill is not just a birth control measure, it is an abortion measure. And they're forcing the Catholic Church, to do something which is against their religious convictions. Set the issue aside of what we're talking about. The government of the United States forcing a church to violate its own principles. I give credit to the bishops around this country who said, I can't tell you the number of times I've heard folks of different faiths stand up and say, we are all now Catholics in this fight. And they stood and said, we will not obey, we will not do what the government has told us we must do because it is against everything we believe in. Let's see who wins that fight in America. And if you thought that was the only thing that they're trying to do, I encourage you to go back just a few weeks before. The amazing thing about this case is that the president pushed forward these regulations after having been smacked down by the United States Supreme Court the week before. I mean, smacked down, 9-0. How many 9-0 cases do you see out of that court? But 9-0. The president made the argument, his solicitor made the argument, that when it came to hiring ministers in your church, the name of the case was Hosanna Table. Do you suspect that's not a Catholic church? And the case was whether they could be required under employment discrimination statutes to hire people as ministers who didn't agree with the church's teachings. I think it was Justice Kagan that asked an oral argument to the assistant solicitor who argued the case with the Obama administration. Are you suggesting in this case that employment discrimination laws applied to churches for the hiring of ministers could require the Catholic Church to hire female priests? And she said yes. Understand what's at stake, folks. It's your economic liberty. It's your religious liberty. It's your freedom of speech. The Archdiocese of the military wanted to send a letter out similar to the ones that bishops all over the country did. And the United States Army said, no, you can't send that. Because the words talking about that you won't bend to this regulation are seditious. And they made them change the language before they could read it at the masses on Sundays. Ladies and gentlemen, this race is about freedom. It's about economic freedom and the opportunity to grow our country. Believe what you want to believe and practice that belief. I don't know if you've been listening to the President, the Secretary of State, and other members of the Cabinet when they talk about freedom of religion. They don't say that anymore. They don't talk about freedom of religion. They talk about freedom of worship. Freedom of worship. You folks all know there's a big difference between freedom of worship and freedom of religion. Think about what I just said. We have leaders of this country who are now narrowing the view of what religious liberty is in the First Amendment. So now you have the freedom to go into that church and do whatever you want, but once you walk out, you're ours. You will do what we tell you, not what they tell you. This is the most important election in your lifetime.